I'm Rachel Roberts, your host today, and here with me is John Ayers and Mary Ellen Solon. Thank you both for being with OK State of Mind today. Just to get things started, will you both tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at FCS?
Sure. My name is John Ayers. I'm the Vice President of our outpatient programs. I've been at Family and Children's for about 11 years, going on 12. I'm also a gay man. I've been out for about 30 years in the community and do quite a bit of work with members of the LGBTQ plus community.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm Mary Ellen Solon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the program director for the Women's Justice Team. And I've been with Family and Children's Services a little under 2 years at this point. I'm not a native of Tulsa. I am from Boston. And I'm also a bisexual individual who is a parent to a queer identified child.
Great. Well, thank you both again for being here today. Today we're talking about mental health in the LGBTQ plus community. So just to start off, can you all talk about some of the unique challenges to this community compared to mainstream communities?
For me, the thing that comes out as the biggest challenge for our community is the coming out process. Mm-hmm. The coming out process is the developmental process of developing an awareness of the LGBTQ identity and then determining how to start making personal voluntary disclosures to other people that you trust. Mm-hmm. Normally, that initial disclosure is to family or friends, and then trying to figure out levels of disclosure throughout different areas of your life. Mm. So, for example, initial disclosure might be with parents, siblings, close friends, and then as people start to become more comfortable in their identity, it might expand to a broader friend group, or for adults, it might be coworkers. That is a very oversimplified way of stating that. Mm-hmm. It's actually a very complex process that for some people can take years. And it comes with many layers of complex emotions. It can be very difficult to work through.
Mm-hmm. Do you think age plays a role in that too? I mean, if we have a child that's coming out versus someone who's more settled in their life with their social circles and things like that, their career.
I think it's always complicated. It's just different types of complications, right? Like the coming out process is not fixed. Like for instance, John and I just came out to you all, right? And that matters because we do live in a culture that assumes heteronormativity is what we called, right? That like being in a heterosexual relationship or identifying that way is the norm. And so we are constantly coming out all the time, right? And of course, like us coming out, we're choosing right now to do so here on this podcast, right? But it's different when you're a kid because like in childhood development, it is a lot harder to be able to distinguish between yourself and between others, right? Mm-hmm. And also at early on, like middle childhood through like the teen years, folks are really oriented towards each other in terms of being focused on each other's behaviors, right? Because they're trying to look towards others in order to understand themselves better. And so it can definitely be more complicated because you have less choices about who you get to surround yourself with when you're a younger person. And you also have less choices about the feedback that you're getting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can remember when I was very young, one of the first things that I learned, I was in third grade, and do you remember the Valentine's Day bags? Mm-hmm. And you'd have to go and pat the...
Right.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure that everyone got a Valentine's so that no one would feel left out. And so I did that, and I put a Valentine's in every single bag. And I didn't really pay attention to whether or not boy or girl, just everyone got one, right? And I remember signing it love. And it was either secret Valentine or I signed my name. And then when everyone got their bag, I got just terribly ridiculed. And so I went home and I was upset. And my mom, she consoled me. She, gave me hugs and probably some cookies. And afterwards, she explained to me that what I had done wrong, the mistake, was that boys are not supposed to tell other boys, I love you. And so this was in third grade, right? So now at this point in my developmental process, there was nothing in my radar thinking about, well, I'm probably gay. But I learned an important lesson that would then set the stage when I became an adolescent of, if I like other boys, then there's something inherently wrong with me. And so we learn very early all these developmental lessons, and they come from all over. They come from the media, they come from our family, they come from school, of
Toys.
Yes, absolutely. Of what is considered normal and correct based on heterosexual standards. And so we internalize that, and for people who are not heterosexual, there becomes this kind of existential crisis of, well, this doesn't fit for me. So what do I do now?
Right.
And that is I think the beginning of the coming out process. It doesn't actually start with telling another person. It's a recognizing of, I don't fit into this mold. So what does that mean for me?
Self-realization that, yeah,
Exactly.
this is who I am.
Yeah.
You know, clearly you're not always going to be supported when you're coming out. Some families are supportive, some might not be. But can you speak to navigating that family response?
I think majority of people today are coming out at younger ages. However, that's not always the rule. There are people that come out later in life. There are people that come out very late in life. You know, if someone decides to make a personal disclosure about their sexual orientation, about their gender identity, things that are the most helpful are first thanking someone, because if I disclose to you something about myself that is that intimate, then that is showing a very high level of trust. I think the next thing that would be helpful is listening to the story, helping just show compassion and understanding. And to be clear, I have a great family, very understanding. They not only accept me, they celebrate me, but that was a journey for us. We went through a lot of difficulty. There were some stages of grief for me, for them. So we had a lot of work to do to get there. But things that aren't always helpful are questions like, well, are you sure? How do you know? Is this just a phase? Alternatively, things like, I'm so glad you trusted me. How can I help? Let me listen. What else would you like to share? Things of those nature are more supportive, I think. Do you agree with that?
I do. I agree big time. And I think also it's important to remember that everybody's coming out experience is unique, and the choices that they make is oftentimes dependent on emotional and physical safety. I think for a long time, everybody sort of thought that there needed to be like a gay pride parade coming out with every coming out. You know, that like it was just like you come out and there it is and it's great. But there are many, many people that decide not to do that, and that's okay, right? For many people, the safest option can be conflict avoidance, right? Because if you think about it, the coming out process, or anytime there's like difference within a family unit or a community, that involves conflict. And I don't mean like necessarily a fight, it's just that there's a tension, right? And people might choose that they need to avoid that process. And they do that by leaving, right? Or they do that by strengthening bonds with family members who are supportive and taking some time away from those who are not, right? And that's okay, for sure. And for some people, they need to have physical space. Like in my own process, I had parents who I knew were supportive because of their values. However, I had other family members and I had a cultural context where being bisexual was bad. And in fact, being bisexual was very dangerous for me, and I was viewed as being dangerous by others, right? And so the first opportunity I had, I booked it out to San Francisco, right, where I could have more safety and enjoy my coming out process there with people that I felt supported by, and then came back to coming out to my family later when I was older and I felt like I had more safety. And so it's really important to honor that, like, the avoidance that I decided to engage in at that time helped set me up so that way I could come out successfully in a supported way when I was older.
Wow. Yeah, that's really powerful. And I mean, you just kind of touched on it, but are there options available, you know, if a family isn't supportive?
Yes, I think it depends on a lot of different things. I think it depends on where you are physically, geographically. I think it depends on your stage of life, your resources available. Certainly there are national resources, and fortunately we live now in an age where you can get on the internet and find resources. That hasn't always been the case, but it is now. One of the things that was particularly helpful for my family was PFLAG, which is a great organization.
Yes.
One of the mistakes that I made in my coming out process, I started kind of figuring out some things for me when I was 14 through 16. And by the time I had a real definitive conversation with my parents, I was 18. So, doing the math there, that's about 4 years for me to work through a developmental process. And when I told them in very definitive words, I am gay, then I gave them about 2 weeks to get happy with that. And when they didn't, I interpreted that as, oh, well, you're homophobic. And in a way, I kind of set them up for failure because I didn't give them the same time and space to work through some of the emotions that I had taken 4 years to work through. One of the best things that happened is there was a teacher that my sisters had been working with who my mom happened to mention this to, and she got them connected to PFLAG, and that was one of the best things that could have happened for our family because they normalized everything that was happening with our family, with me, with them. And after a couple years, we got to a place where everything was starting to get better for us. We had a lot of healing to do. There was a lot of misinformation out at the time. I came out late 80s, early 90s, so this was on the tail end of the AIDS epidemic. Marriage equality was not a concept. There was not this idea that we could live the same quality of life as our heterosexual partners. And so they were struggling with all the things that I would not have. So PFLAG, definitely a resource that is out there for families.
For our listeners who don't know, what is PFLAG?
Sure. Parents
Parents and friends of lesbians and gays, is that right?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
We'll look it up.
We'll look it up. It's PFLAG.
And what, but I guess too, what I was getting at, what services do they provide, or information or things like that?
So it's a support system specifically for allies and family members of individuals who are members of the queer community. Okay. So in my case, I had come out and was really kind of pushing the envelope with my parents saying, I'm gay, I need you to just know this, accept
deal with it, and this is me.
And they didn't know what to make of that because they had known me as being heterosexual for 18 years. And now all of a sudden, I'm coming home with a boyfriend. I was very visible in my gay identity. It was the 90s. You can use your imagination. And they just didn't know how to reconcile the two different identities. And so going to these meetings and kind of understanding that they hadn't lost a son. And that's what they were struggling with. They had a lot of fear about my personal safety. Yes. I interpreted that as rejection. And so being able to reconcile all those very strong emotions was helpful. Yeah. And I wasn't the one to help them through that. They needed to have other parents that had had shared experiences to say, your son's going to be fine.
Right. Yeah. And I think if I may just to take a step back, this is something John and I were talking about earlier, is that, there are a lot of mental health concern risks for folks in the LGBTQ community, right? Higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of depression, higher risk of suicidality. But the reason for this is not from holding the identity of being an LGBTQ person. The reason for it is the constantly managing the way that society treats us and views us. And we experience that, but then also our family members experience that too. And so it's so important to have spaces like PFLAG where parents are supported and they're able to work through their fears and worries, right? Because that's often where rejection comes from. It's from that fear and worry of like, what's going to happen to my child? And also like, are we going to stay attached to our communities with this, right? So it's twofold. And then us who are LGBTQ are experiencing that too. Like, will I be visible? Will I be seen? Will I be cared for? Right? So it's that tension there. It's not holding the identity. It's constantly holding the way that society views us, right?
And I imagine, like, things that the mainstream community might not think about, like social interactions and going to a restaurant or a bar. And can you touch on any of that? Like,
Sure.
I mean, because you were talking about anxiety, depression, things like, I would imagine that just everyday things that other people wouldn't think about could play a role in that.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting for me with holding like a bisexual identity, right, is that I've been partnered with a male for 15 years. And when I go out with him in restaurants, bars, wherever, like I am not thinking about my safety or what our relationship looks like to other people. However, I have a very strong queer community here within Tulsa. And when I go out with my friends who are also queer, particularly those that hold the same gender as I, it is a different experience even though I'm in the same place. Yeah. And so again, it goes back to like, I feel like I'm living that constantly of like, it is not about the identity that I hold. It is about the way that others are viewing me and my sense of safety there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think much the same. Yeah, I've been married now for 8 years. I might get in trouble if that number's wrong.
I was going to say, you better not be listening.
Bad enough. But I've been partnered for longer than that. And, one of the things that continues to come up in our relationship is how do we behave when we're in public? An example might be we took a cruise vacation several years ago, and couples out on the deck walking and holding hands. And for us, that entailed a conversation. Do we hold hands? Do we not hold hands? Is that safe? My sister had a wedding. Do we dance? Do we not dance? And so public displays of affection for us are not always as simple as it might be for our heterosexual counterparts. Part of it is safety. Part of it is, do we want people staring at us versus enjoying the moment? Like, we don't want to be a scene. And it shouldn't be that. We should be able to just enjoy the environment just like everyone else. And yet that is just kind of a constant low part of our life, particularly when it comes to safety area. I mean, most of the time when we are out in public, particularly in this part of the country, we are very conscientious of our safety. And so where other couples might be able to walk outside and hold hands, we just enjoy each other's space. Same thing within, like a restaurant or a concert. I mean, we're very conscientious of our body proximity.
Yeah. And, being the parent of like a queer identified child, it is a lot of work trying to both teach her that she can accept her identity and also teach her that certain spaces are not safe, right? And that's like a really complicated thing to hold for someone like a young person. I'm grateful that she gets to hold that with us, that it feels fraught, right? Of being like, with some of your friends, you may feel comfortable, or here are some cues you can look for from like the conversations you're hearing that they're having with their parents, right? It's like you're constantly doing this dance of teaching your child that they deserve to exist everywhere. And when you are existing everywhere, it gets complicated fast, and it can be there are safety concerns related to it emotionally and physically, right? Which isn't uncommon for many folks that hold marginalized identities, right? We hear that from members of the BIPOC community all the time, right? Is that like, how do I help my child to feel safe and accepted and also know the realities of the risks that are involved in being in certain places. And the same goes for like parenting queer children, right? If they have those displays, if they have those markers that they can look for, then they know that they're a little bit safer. But without that, it's really hard to tell.